The devil knows that if he can control your thought life, he can control your body chemistry and cause disease. And one of the tools that he uses is fear, anxiety, and stress. If you are sick, you are not going to have much of an impact for God's kingdom, and you are not going to fulfill his calling on your life. Understanding the enemy will help you overcome him. Understanding how fear, anxiety, and stress works in your brain and its subsequent reaction in your body will help you to control it. Fear, anxiety, and stress is a toxic stronghold or thorn tree in your mind, which disrupts the way in which you function spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, and physically. Stress is a modern term, but the Greek and Hebrew in English would identify it as fear. And another word is anxiety. We could also use the word worry. Let's define stress. Stress is the mind and body's response to any pressure that would disrupt a normal peaceful state. It is your brain converting that thought into a physical reaction in your body. Stress is a global term for the extreme strain on your body and its organ systems as a result of toxic thinking. Fear is the root of stress. Our body moves into a toxic state when our thoughts become toxic as a result of fear. Fear is a spiritual force that triggers more than 1,400 known harmful physical and chemical responses in your body, and it activates more than 30 different hormones and neurotransmitters. This has an incredible detrimental effect on your body. According to Hosea 4 verse 6, God's children are perishing because of lack of knowledge. Fear, anxiety, and stress is destroying your body behind the scenes, and you don't even know it. Initially, you don't even realize that it's happening, and that's scary. Many people's minds and thought life are plagued by fear. Fear of tomorrow, fear of finances, fear of disease, fear of death, fear of security, fear of man, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of abandonment, fear of trains, planes, the list is endless. Anything that takes away our freedom produces fear. Anytime we are humiliated, oppressed, victimized, verbally abused, emotionally abused, physically abused, sexually abused, or even oppressive legalistic church abuse that crushes people's spirits, are all tragedy situations that has the potential to produce fear and the resultant stress reaction in our body. There are 3 stages of stress. These stages are a good example of how toxic thinking can cause extreme physical reactions that damage almost every organ system in our body. Stage 1 of stress is called the alarm stage, or the fight or flight response. This is a reaction generated by your hypothalamus, pituitary gland, sympathetic nervous system, and your adrenal glands, which are on top of your kidneys. The first stage of stress is the sweaty palm, heart-beating fast, adrenaline-pumping reaction that was designed by God as a survival mechanism in emergency situations. This is what you need when you suddenly have to swerve your car to avoid hitting something, or when you suddenly have to run for your life when you bump into a snake or a lion in the bush. This physical response was designed to counteract the danger by mobilizing the body's resources for immediate physical activity. In essence, the first stage of stress, or the alarm reaction, makes sure that large amounts of glucose for energy and oxygen are transported in the blood to the organs that are most involved in warding off the danger, which would include the following: the muscles in your arms and legs to either fight off the attacker or danger, or to run away, in other words, flight, hence the term fight or flight response. Blood with oxygen and energy is diverted to the brain, which becomes highly alert. You are focused and you're thinking very clearly. Your heart rate increases, and the strength of the pumping action of your heart also increases to pump as much blood as possible to your brain and muscles. This is why you can feel your heart beating fast after you've just had a fright. Your rate of breathing will increase, and your trachea, which is your windpipe, becomes wider so that you can breathe in more air and get more oxygen, which is needed by your brain, heart, and muscles. The liver increases the levels of glucose and fat in your bloodstream, and this is for increased energy, which is needed again by the brain, heart, and muscles. The spleen, which is the storage reservoir for blood, contracts, and it discharges more blood into the bloodstream. Blood is directed away from your skin and digestive system, and it's sent to your heart and muscles. This is because the digestive system is not needed in a danger situation. There's no time to eat when you need to run for your life. So the alarm reaction makes you alert, it makes you strong and focused, and it enables you to react quickly. Stage 1 of stress will also help you to build memory. It enables your nerve cells to build memory branches very effectively and efficiently. You are actually in stage 1 of stress at the moment, because your brain has to take in all the information that you are listening to, and it must be able to build memories. The chemicals that are released during this reaction will alert you, and they help with memory building. It helps you to focus and to concentrate, which is a good thing. In stage 1 of stress, a hormone called CRF is released from your hypothalamus in small quantities. CRF stands for corticotropin-releasing hormone. To make it easier and to avoid using confusing medical terms, I'll call CRF the yellow hormone. This yellow hormone is an excellent chemical to start building memory. The yellow chemical stimulates the pituitary gland in the brain to release a small amount of a chemical called ACTH. ACTH stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone, but we'll call this the red hormone. The red hormone keeps you alert. It stimulates the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys to release hormones called adrenaline and cortisol. These hormones are all very good in small quantities to keep you alert and focused. What happens then is the adrenaline and cortisol will go to the brain, and it will tell the hypothalamus and pituitary gland that there's enough adrenaline and cortisol in the bloodstream and that they can stop producing the yellow and red hormones. And this is what is called a negative feedback loop. So the process stops and you go into a settled, peaceful state of processing and building memory. As soon as you lose attention again, your body will be shifted back into that cycle where more yellow and red hormones will be produced again. This is a positive cycle when you have short bursts of these chemicals for short periods of time. Stress becomes harmful when you've been in stage 1 for too long, or when it is triggered by a negative, toxic thought. This then makes you shift into stage 2 of stress, which is also called the resistance stage or acute long-term stress. If you shift from being alert to being anxious, fearful, worried, angry, or bitter, the hypothalamus will respond by secreting too much of the yellow hormone. In large quantities, the chemical structure of the yellow hormone changes, and because the chemical structure of that yellow hormone changes in stage 2 of stress, we'll now refer to it as the black hormone. So in excessive quantities, the yellow hormone shifts from being a good hormone that builds memory to a black hormone, which the medical field has called the chemical of negative expectation, in other words, dread. The black hormone then stimulates the pituitary gland to release the red hormone in excessive quantities. The red hormone in large quantities is what the medical field calls the fear hormone. So this is fear in physical form. When the adrenaline and cortisol go back to the brain to tell it to stop secreting the yellow and red hormones, the large quantities of those yellow and red hormones will override this negative feedback loop. So as a result, large quantities of adrenaline and cortisol are now produced. So now the situation is that there is too much yellow hormone, too much red hormone, and too much adrenaline and cortisol that are chaotically flowing through your whole body. And this is what stage 2 of stress is. These stress hormones in large quantities are destructive over time because they're not supposed to flow continuously, only in short bursts. A burst of stress is much healthier than constant daily stress, which puts your body into a complete state of illness, mentally and physically. When all of these stress hormones are flowing in large quantities, you can't hear your heart, as the ANF is drowned out and overwhelmed by all of those stress chemicals. So what God created to help you in an emergency situation has now turned on you and begun to destroy your body. What was meant for good has now become bad. Let's do a quick summary of stage 2. The hypothalamus produces too much of the yellow hormone. In excessive quantities, the chemical structure of the yellow hormone changes and it becomes the black hormone, which the medical community has called the chemical of negative expectation or dread. Too much of the red hormone, which is the fear hormone, is secreted from the pituitary gland. Too much cortisol and adrenaline, which are the stress hormones, are now being released from the adrenal gland, which were on top of the kidneys. All of the electrical and chemical feedback loops have become disrupted when the adrenaline and cortisol goes back to the hypothalamus to tell it to stop secreting the yellow and red hormones. That message is drowned out by the excessive quantities of the yellow and red hormones. So the hypothalamus continues to produce too much of the yellow hormone and the negative cycle perpetuates. As high levels of cortisol flow over your brain, the branches of the memories on your nerves begin to shrink. This is what happens, for example, when you go into an exam and you suddenly go blank, where you suddenly can't remember anything. Once the cortisol levels have been reduced, the branches will come up again, and you will be able to recall that information again. But over time, the cortisol, like battery acid, will literally flow through and corrode those branches and break off those branches on that memory. And now you have broken memory on the branches of your nerves. As a result, your thinking becomes foggy. You begin to have difficulty concentrating. You have trouble with your memory, where you become forgetful and your creativity levels drop. This is the stage where you start feeling physically unwell, where all sorts of vague symptoms develop. You are not so sick that you need to be bedridden, but you no longer wake up in the morning feeling full of the joys of spring. You start feeling tense, anxious, overwhelmed, out of control, and you begin to feel like giving up. You will find that you start getting constant aches and pains, and you're suddenly at the doctor more than you'd like to be. Everything seems to be going wrong with your body. Whatever infection is out there, you seem to be catching, and so on. Now you can stay in stage 2 of stress for 10, 20, 30 or more years, and you will shift in and out of this stage 2 of stress. When you relax, for example, when you have a great time on the weekend, or you go to a movie, the stress hormones will subside, and the whole cycle will calm down, and you will rejuvenate a bit. But then you will shift back into stage 2 of stress again. And over time, you will begin to shift into stage 2 too quickly. And it becomes easier and easier for you to shift into that negative state where there's high levels of stress hormones, and it becomes more and more difficult to control. Eventually, after 10 or 20 or 30 years of this, you'll shift into stage 3 of stress. Stage 3 is when it gets very dangerous. This is where you see the big illnesses coming in. Stage 3 is also called the exhaustion stage or death cycle. This is where the whole system never stops reacting. The adrenal glands on top of the kidneys become enlarged. All organs are on heightened alert for too long. Your organs don't relax and they become exhausted and begin to break down. And at this stage, you feel very ill. Memory and all mental functions decrease. There's a feeling of loss of control and failure. And over time, your mind and emotions simply burn out. Tissue damage occurs and changes occur at a cellular level. You have special receptors on the surface of the cells in your body that respond to the chemicals that flow in your bloodstream. You have hundreds of different chemicals flowing through your body, such as steroids, peptides, and hormones, that are all carrying a copy of the memory that was formed in your mind, as well as emotion. They are the information-emotion molecules that I spoke about in session 2. The receptors have a very specific shape that fits into a specific chemical, just like a key fits into a lock. For example, the square chemical in this picture fits in the receptor, but the oval one can't. When a chemical binds to its receptor on the surface of a cell, it will stimulate a specific reaction, for example, metabolism or cell growth. Now, there are thousands of different receptors on the surface of a cell that the different chemicals and hormones in the bloodstream will bind to stimulate a specific reaction in the cells of your body. So how does a specific chemical find its specific receptor that it fits into amongst thousands of the different receptors on the surface of your body cells? Well, the chemicals vibrate as they pass over the surface of the body, and the receptor that it fits into has a corresponding vibration. And this is what is referred to as your body's music, because vibrations are basically sound waves. As well as good chemicals flowing in our bloodstream, we also have bad substances, for example, cancer cells, bacteria, or flu viruses. If you are not stressed, a bacteria or a parasite or flu virus will try and get into the cell, but they won't be able to fit into the receptor. It's like trying to put the wrong key into a lock. You won't be able to open the door. Eventually, your immune system will send out killer cells that will go and kill that bacteria or flu virus. But if you shift into stage 2 of stress, the high levels of stress hormones will corrode and damage those receptors like battery acid. So whatever is floating past will be able to drop into the cell. So the cell gets what it needs, plus what it doesn't need. In other words, harmful things like bacteria and viruses. That is why it's easier for you to catch the flu or to get sick when you are stressed out. For example, students at exam time. Any of the sicknesses that are out there will hit you, and you will feel constantly exhausted because the cells have damaged receptors and they are just accepting anything that is floating around. But fortunately, when you deal with that toxic thinking by eradicating fear and anxiety and stress from your thought life, and you choose to think correctly, your nerve structure in your brain is changed. Your body is connected to your brain, and those receptors will be healed and repaired and function as they were supposed to again. This is because your brain takes your thought life and converts it into a physical reaction. Here is a reaction on a cellular level which is damage to the receptors on the surface of the body cell because of fear, anxiety, and stress in your thought life. But God is an awesome God. We can mess up our body for years with toxic thinking, but by choosing to think correctly, we can start healing.